What I learned as I lived in Vietnam from members and people I met about the Vietnam War was that Vietnam had been split into two countries, North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and Northern Vietnam had a big drive to reunite their country. They wanted to be one country again. They were a communist country, and the South was a republic, and so there were two different political systems in place. The Americans supported the Republic of Vietnam in the South, and there was a war which happened in many different stages. In the end, the North came in and drove their tanks up to the presidential palace in Saigon and declared victory, and Vietnam became one country once again. After America had fought in the war for quite a significant amount of time and had been spending a lot of money and a lot of lives on this war in this foreign country, the American people and the American government overwhelmingly did not support that war, and so the American troops pulled out. And without the American support, the South wasn't strong enough to hold back the Northern forces. I'm not sure all the war tactics that were used in the Vietnam War, but the Vietnamese people, they had been in Vietnam for over 1,000 years, and they understood their country, and so I think that gave them an advantage, possibly. But the memories that people have about Vietnam are the Vietnam War. They're not positive. I don't think it's positive for anyone who is involved. Most Vietnamese people were affected by this in some way. They had lost a friend or relative, or they themselves had fought in the war. My family is in America now because of the war. My grandfather was an Air Force commander stationed in Da Nang at the time of the war. His family was evacuated about 2 weeks before the South fell, and they were evacuated to Guam, where my grandma and my dad and my aunts and uncles lived for a few weeks. And one day the refugee plane stopped coming, and my grandma thought that my grandfather did not make it out of Vietnam, and that distressed her a lot. But one day my grandma was sitting in her bed, and she heard some men outside of where they were sleeping, and she was really afraid, and she told her children to hide, and because she thought somebody had come to do harm to her family, because there were these refugees in Guam, and they were kind of put there without it was my grandfather who showed up, and they were able to get a plane to America. They were able to settle here. But I know that my family had to leave behind everything. It was their plan that they would one day go back to Vietnam, but they never were able to do that until my dad came and he picked me up from my mission. He was the first one in my family to return to Vietnam. I think that was a really good experience for him. But the Vietnam War really changed millions of people's lives. For some, it sent them to foreign countries, and for others, they lost people that they really loved. But there are some silver linings that we can see in the war, that as these Vietnamese citizens resettled in foreign countries, they came in contact with the gospel. Like my father, I wouldn't have been born if he hadn't had moved here. And so I'm really grateful that all of these things happened, even though there was a lot of bad. I feel like now we can start building on the good. When I had gotten there in 2013, I didn't feel any anti-American sentiment. I felt like they were really accepting of me, and they were interested in my culture, and they were very kind. And if the topic of the Vietnam War did come up, they would often tell me that in the past America had been a bad thing, or that the American government at that time had made mistakes. But they never held me to those things. They were really accepting of me.